skits, translations, and features in approximately 350 newspapers and magazines, both in India and abroad. He has authored 33 books in English and 23 big books in Tamil. बहुत बहुत स्वागत सर. अब मैं बुलाना चाहूंगी पारमिता शतपथी जी को, हमारे बीच में हैं. आइएगा पारमिता जी, आपका मंच पर स्वागत है. प्लीज पुट योर हैंड्स टुगेदर एज शी ग्रेसेस द स्टेज. पारमिता शतपथी ओडिया और अंग्रेजी में लिखने वाली द्विभाषी लेखिका हैं. आपकी 25 पुस्तकें प्रकाशित हैं, जिनमें कहानी संग्रह, उपन्यास, उपन्यासिकाएं और कविता संग्रह शामिल है. आपके कहानी संग्रह प्राप्ति को साहित्य अकादमी पुरस्कार प्राप्त हुआ है और आपके उपन्यास अभिप्रेत काल ने सरला पुरस्कार प्राप्त किया है. बहुत बहुत स्वागत. अब मैं आग्रह करूंगी शुभा शर्मा जी से कि आप आइए और प्लीज टेक योर सीट ऑन द स्टेज एंड यू प्लीज गिव अ राउंड ऑफ अप्लॉज एज आई इंट्रोड्यूस हर. शुभा शर्मा लेडी श्री राम कॉलेज और जवाहरलाल नेहरू विश्वविद्यालय की पूर्व छात्र हैं और भारतीय प्रशासनिक सेवा की सदस्य हैं. आपकी पहली पुस्तक फ्लाई ऑन द वॉल एंड अदर स्टोरीज को बहुत अच्छी प्रतिक्रिया प्राप्त हुई है और इसे हिंदी, उड़िया, हिब्रू और इतालवी भाषाओं में अनुवाद किया गया है. आपकी दूसरी कृति द अवस्थीज ऑफ आम नगरी मूल रूप से अंग्रेजी में प्रकाशित एक उपन्यास है और उड़िया में इसका अनुवाद किया गया है. आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है. और अब मैं न्योता दूंगी वर्तिका नंदा जी को कि कृपया करके मंच पर आएं. आप तालियों के साथ इनका स्वागत कीजिए. वर्तिका नंदा बहुचर्चित जेल सुधारक, मीडिया शिक्षिका और लेखिका हैं. जेल पर नए प्रयोगों के लिए आप जानी जाती हैं. 4 पुस्तकें लिखी हैं जो भारतीय जेलों के जीवंत दस्तावेज हैं. तिनका तिनका फाउंडेशन की संस्थापक. आपने भारतीय जेलों में पत्रकारिता की नींव रखी है और आप स्त्री शक्ति पुरस्कार से सम्मानित हैं और वर्तमान में दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय के लेडी श्री राम कॉलेज में पत्रकारिता विभाग की प्रमुख हैं. आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है. सो यहाँ से बागडोर हमारे चेयर के हाथ में. सत्र का समय है. माइक वहां पे अगर हमारी टेक्निकल टीम में कोई है तो प्लीज यहाँ पर 2 माइक्स रखवाइएगा. सत्र का समय है 1.5 घंटा. तो अगर हम 1.5 hours, so if you could please abide by the time. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for lovely introductions and good evening. We have a wonderful, eminent panel, and as we start our discussions, I would suggest that we go around once expressing our thoughts, maybe for about 8-9 minutes, and then we come back to respond to each other, or if there are any questions, then we can ask those questions, and then we can take the discussion forward. See, this is something that is a work to which we go back can be a very personal experience, because there are texts to which we repeatedly go back, we reread, because it has touched something deep inside us. It's kind of a to use a metaphor which once Girish Karnad used, it's like the tongue that goes back and again to the wounded tooth. So this is something like that. We go back to some of these works, and it can be very personal experience. But I'm sure that if we examine that closely, we'll find certain characteristics of these works that are common across cultures, across languages, and so on. And also, we go back because these works fire our imagination in a certain way. Every time we revisit, it gives us something. Because, see, the work has not changed. It is that we who have changed over a period of time when we go back. So it is actually the readers who have changed and who find different meanings in these works. So I'm sure the discussion that we are going to have will be very exciting. And let me start with Vartika. Let me start with you. You can share your thoughts, and then we can
Okay.
If you are comfortable, you can go there and
No, I
speak
think
if you want.
I'm perfectly fine here. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts. Um, so every person is a story. हम में से जितने लोग यहाँ पर बैठे हैं, सबके पास कोई कहानी है और हम सब एक कहानी है. हम सब कहानी. I would like to speak in both the languages. Can I mix the language? Okay. So each one of us has a story inside us. The moment the life ends, we can narrate the story in one sentence or in a paragraph or two paragraphs, but life or in itself is a story. So whenever I think about these stories, the first thing which come to my mind is that one story that each one of us have inside us. Sometimes we are able to narrate those stories, and sometimes we are quiet about it. Silence is the biggest story. This is what I feel. Of many things that you never speak about, but they are gestures. You write, you sing, your eyes speak. Those are also some stories which are timeless stories. I would like to tell you two stories, two different narratives which are very important for me. One is about Tinka Jail Radio. This is in-house radio station, which is run inside jails. This is a very new concept for India. And recently, National Book Trust published this book, Radio in Prison. So this is about how inmates are given a microphone and they try to rewrite their lives through microphone and they tell their stories. So there's one person whose name is Master G. We call him Master G. He is a life convict. He has spent nearly 20 years in a prison. He was a teacher before coming to the jail. When he came to the jail, he became almost a non-entity, which should never happen. So one fine day, when he met me, and we were going through the process of introducing prison radio, I asked him, Master Ji, why don't you become part of the radio? He said, what will I do? I'm not a singer. I said, you are a teacher. So let's have a teacher telling stories of motivation to inmates. And this is something which has actually happened in front of my eyes. You all will be really surprised to know that from that day, Master Ji used to come to prison jail radio every day from 7 to 9 a.m. and then 3 to 6 p.m., telling inmates motivational stories and also telling them to enroll themselves for further education. This really helped. And this help took a very different turn, especially during COVID-19, because that was the time all of us were thinking about ourselves. How will we be able to save ourselves? How many of us actually even spared a moment to think about what is happening inside the jail? So this Master Ji took the microphone and he did two things. One, motivational stories, and also telling them, please come out of your state of depression. There are no visitations happening. There are sorrows, there is loneliness, but let's rewrite our lives through microphones. And this is what I think, these are the stories of change, which normally people do not know to a larger extent, but I'm sure they are timeless stories. And the other narrative is about, which is linked to Delhi police. We have a podcast series called Kissa Khaki Ka. This is the only podcast series which is run by any police department in India. And yesterday we completed 161 episodes. Every week, every Sunday at 2 p.m., we broadcast one story of change. The maximum time limit till now has been 2.5 minutes, which has now been increased to 5 minutes. Every story is a story of change. So there's a cop who is told that there's a woman admitted in AIMS. She has, there are very few chances of her surviving. Dil dhadak raha hai aur khatm ho rahi hain sansein. And on the other hand, there's another guy who is 26-year-old who is admitted in another hospital, struggling for life, and he needs a heart transplant. So this woman, who is above 80, her family decides that we would like to donate the heart. And then comes in Delhi police, a green corridor is made. The heart is transported from AIMS to the other hospital. It takes only few minutes, and in those few minutes, the life is saved. This is also a timeless story because these are stories which are almost unheard. These are stories for which generally we do not have time because these stories have neither the spice nor the sensation, but these stories have a heart.
May I request you to start? Yeah.
I'd like to bring a completely different perspective from what Vartika ji just said. I think there are many, many stories in this world, but only some live on beyond the boundaries of time and space. And what are the unique characteristics which make a story timeless or which makes us want to go back to it? So each one of us may have a personal favorite story that we like to go back to as much as we want. And like our opening moderator sir mentioned, that when we go back to it at different stages of our lives, we interpret it differently, we even understand the nuances, or we find something new which we had missed when we read it some time back. But with these unique exceptions apart, there are some common elements that will link. So if in this room we ask, what are your top 10 favorite books or favorite stories, we might find 2 or 3, or maybe 1 coming on most people's list. So what are the characteristics, or what is it that makes a tale timeless beyond the the boundaries of space or geography? Frankly, I wish I knew completely, because that would have allowed me to write something which had all those ingredients in it. I am yet to discover it, on the path of discovery. But when I look back and I wonder what is it that makes certain writings very special, I find some common elements. The first, it needs to make the reader think, pause. Long after you've closed the book, it remains in your mind. Something which may disturb you, like let us say the kite runner. I can never get that passage where the young boy is physically assaulted by his fellow, not friends, but other children of his age. Very disturbing, but something which stays on with you many, many years later. Or it would be something which is so integral to your own life, something which you see every day. Stories of Tagore, Asha Purna Devi, Premchand. You can feel that you are the character, and this has happened to you or to somebody that you know. Also, for a long time, I used to think that stories which have a tragic ending somehow leave you thinking, wanting more. I don't know, maybe that's a personal opinion, but happy stories somehow don't really leave that impact on our minds as, and I would like to think of Shakespeare in that consequence. He wrote so many plays, but A Midsummer Night's Dream, or As You Like It, does not have the same affinity or the same popularity which Macbeth or King Lear. So there is something about tragedy which maybe touches us. And if I looked back and I saw some novelists in the last, let us say, 100 years, or some storytellers in the last 100 years, I found that some of these elements were there in all. The everyday, not necessarily writing about big people or big dreams or big projects, but when you're telling a story, weaving it, small details, or maybe nothing at all, just something very, very abstract, but which again, it needs to connect with readers, it needs to make them think, And it needs to keep them wanting for more. What is happening after that? I think that is what sets tales apart as timeless. Thank you.
Thank you for wonderful insight into this. May I request Mr. Raja to say a few things?
No, I would like to go there.
Would like to go last?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Friends, I am accustomed to stand in the classroom for 40 years. So I would like to stand before you and speak, even though I retired some 11 years ago. Tell me a story. Tell me a story. Twice I have heard. When I was a child, I used to ask my grandfather, tell me a story. He used to lull me into sleep by telling a story. And then when I became a father, my three children used to gather around me and say, tell me a story. But now I have become a grandfather. I have 5 grandchildren, but these children do not bother me with that question, tell me a story, because all of them are stuck up to their cell phones. So they don't like to listen to my story. Even if I pull them and make them sit by my side, I will tell you a story, listen. These children simply say, don't worry, there is no problem. You go to sleep, we will go to sleep with our cell phones. Finished. Now, when we ask that question, whether a story is of eternal value, I would like to say that instead of going through the modern stories, I would like you to go back to the folk tales. Folk tales are those tales that are told by folk just for making you wise, but none of the modern stories. Friends, I was teaching world literature for several years at the postgraduate center, but I have never come across any good story, whether it is written by Maupassant or Chekhov or by O. Henry. I would like to say that the best stories were told by the folks. Now, what is the purpose of the story? But before I start the purpose of the story, I would like you to differentiate between a story and a tale, because our subject is story and tale. So, story is talking about one incident, but a tale would like to say incident after incidents. For example, you take Panchatantra. I am talking about the frame tale. Look at the frame tale only, not at all the Panchatantra stories. Look at the frame tale. There is one king of Magilaropia. He had 5 dullard sons, very dullard sons. They can't understand anything. He invited teachers from all the parts of India and asked them to teach their children, teach his children. Unfortunately, nobody was able to help these people come up in life. Then his minister, Vishnu Sarma, he came forward to educate these sons. And he started telling stories after stories on the bank of a river. And then one story after another inspired them. And what happened was all the 5 dullard sons became fit for the post of the king. So this is only a frame tale. This frame tale is enough to tell you that every story has only one incident. So this is only one incident. But you go deep into Panchatantra. Wise stories, vicious stories, comic stories, several other stories form the part and parcel of Panchatantra. So they are tales. They become tales. The tales that cannot be forgotten for any reason. Take for example, Arabian Nights. 1001 Arabian Nights is not the original title. The original title is 1000 Nights and a Night. that a night is more important. 1,000 nights and a night. You know about the frame tale of this Arabian Nights. For example, the Sultan Shahryar, he was interested in marrying a girl every day. And next day morning, she will come back from her room as a dead person. So one after the another, he was getting married and then finally sending them to the grave. Finally, one lady by name Sharazad. Sharazad was the daughter of a minister of of Sultan Shahryar. So she said, I will marry him. I will marry him. And then she says, she begins a story. And Sultan Shahryar was waiting in his room just to kill her. And she begins a story. And she gathers all the children available in the palace and she starts telling stories. And these stories, mesmerize all the children. And the king also, the sultan also, was listening to her stories. And when all these up for about half of the story was told, then she would say, if I am alive, I will finish the story. If I am alive tomorrow, I will finish the story. Sultan Shahryar says, oh my God, she has told the story, but it is incomplete. With this, I cannot go to sleep. So tomorrow she will live. And next day, what happens was she completes the story and begins the next story, and she does not finish it. And then third day, it happens like that. 1,000 stories have been told. That is a frame tale. And after finishing this 1,000 tales, then one night, that's the last night, she says, tomorrow I will not be alive. And by this time, she has several children. She has three children. And when this happens, she has three children. And then she says, no, tomorrow I will not be alive to complete the story. But on the 1,001 night, that last night, there is Sultan Shahryar. He comes forward and says, listen, you are more important to me than because you told me all the stories, 1,000 stories, and these stories have gone, they are stuck up in my mind, and let me make you live. And you are the best wife available, because who can tell the story to the husband? You can tell a story to your child. You can tell a story to your students. But whoever tells a story to the husband, wife is also sitting here. You can ask her whether she tells me a story or not. So friends, it is the frame tale that is more important. When we talk about the frame tales actually grasp you. They will tell you what sort of stories are inside the work. It is just like our great book, Kada Sarit Sahara. And there, the stories of King Vikramaditya and the Vedala. What is the frame tale? When you take up the frame tale of this King Vikramaditya and the Vedala, King Vikramaditya, he goes to the graveyard and then takes the corpse from the sisu tree, and then he brings he puts the corpse on his shoulder, and then this corpse tells a story. And if you listen to my story, I will ask you 3 questions. If I ask you 3 questions, you have to answer all the 3. Even if you fail in one, your head will break into 1,000 pieces. And then what happens? He tells the story. The corpse tells the story, and immediately after that, the corpse asks 3 questions. And day after day, He narrates one story after another, asks three questions. These three questions make you wise, not the modern stories. These three questions make you very wise day after day because they tell you how to solve problems in life. All of us face problems. All of us invariably face problems. And now, how to face the problem? That is how these stories are told. And this is the very purpose of storytelling. Thank you.
May I request you to.
Thank you, Vivek. When I came to know that I have to speak on something so abstract like this, I started thinking, what is this? What is timelessness and what could be the ingredients of a story? And I know it's not like you put masala, tel, namak, and make a good curry. And what is timelessness? What is the measure of timelessness? 500 years, if it is at all measurable in numbers, 1,000 years, and what could be the ingredients which really had made these stories timeless? Mr. Raja Rao, Mr. Raja, sorry, Mr. Raja has talked about Betal Panchavinsati, then Panchatantra, then Katha Sarita Sagar, Arabian Nights. I would also like to add Escher Fables. And let me just take the trail of Betal Panchavinsati. Yes, the Betal tells Vikramaditya, if you do not say anything, your skull will be fractured into 1,000 pieces. And if you say anything, I'll go back to be hanging there. So maybe that dilemma, that kind of parody and that kind of fantasy and the kind of no solution kind of a thing probably attracted the readers, and then they kept it alive. That had done something with their mind and brain, and they keep churning it. What in solitude they must be thinking, what I could have done, what probably, I mean, like as a child I also kept thinking about it, what I could have done in this situation. And poor Vikramaditya, why could not he be spared? I mean, so many things come into mind. Probably then this tale comes from your past generations, and passes on to the other generations, then become timeless, if it is at all. This is what we are looking at being timelessness. And look at our epic of Mahabharata. Each and every episode is a tale which, I mean, it is a timeless kind of epic. Each and every episode is kind of something different, something magical, something fantastic, something might be happening or may not. As Shubha said, something tragic, something that would have happened in a different way had it been given certain kind of a situation and circumstances. So one thing came to my mind, probably something which stirs the mind and brain of a person or a reader for a very long time, and doesn't usher him to get an answer or a kind of a solution, maybe a kind of a climax, and maybe it is always a mystery, like the ingredients of a timeless tale. And then I always think, what are we talked about Vishnu Sarma Panchatantra. If at all tales, we are talking about things which have been told repeatedly and never ending kind of thing. I believe writing is a very kind of a cerebral connection, or a cerebral kind of a musing and cerebral kind of environment. And when a writer writes about something, probably he thinks to manipulate. I mean, please excuse me for using this word. What could be the mind of the reader who accepts this? So a kind of a thing which a reader identifies himself with the thing, or reader is pushed to imagine things. Reader is put in a situation of fantasy. There is mystery about it, and there is very realities also. We have read so many stories of Premchand, Rabindranath, and many of our Indian writers, and so also from writers from the other countries. So probably it is, I mean, yesterday in some literature festival, I was talking about empathy. Some kind of a connection happens between the reader and the writer, and that makes him remember the tale, and it gets passed on from generation to generation. That is what probably I believe could be. I mean, I still think that it's a very abstract thing to have a kind of because each understands a tale in according to his or her own way of understanding things. So and every takeaway is different from what you heard the other person thinks. So the kind of layers, the kind of mystery, kind of a weaving around, a kind of taking the reader to a different plane probably is been the characteristics of timeless tales. Thank you.
I thought it will be a conversation, have a conversation too, but seems like I can see Anamika here listening, to all of us and our different, perspectives on stories or galpo or katha or kahani, transcending geographical boundaries and also boundaries of imagination and memories. Then it becomes what they call timeless. I don't understand, in fact, I was sharing my conversation with Vivek, maybe on the panel, in the conversation, we also problematize this idea of what is timelessness, because there seems to be, going back to Edward Said, there is a very different kind of Orientalism. So allow me, Nirmal Da is here, and I was thinking about his Ghost of Gosai Bagh, So the ghost is here and the back and the Gosai Bagh. And whenever I think of Nirmal Da, I become a childlike adult, childlike adult. So this is being trained by Ashish Nandi himself. So I'm always never grown up, maybe because of Ashish's training or maybe my own, under socialization in the world, which is, very different kind of a world I come from. I never went to a school, so I'm not formally tutored. So when I started writing, people thought that, perhaps I'm well tutored and over socialized into the language. So what I'm thinking about, this whole idea, maybe panel thinks about whether or not we should problematize this idea of timelessness. Because when I go back in the history, I find from the colonial sources, this whole idea of timelessness, Africa, Latin America, India, timelessness opposed to the Western capitalist world dynamic, and this is where I was thinking that, how to think about conceptually, about a story, about a gulp, about a katha and kahani. Renu's stories are not universal. They are universal and also limited by cultural and other boundaries. So at the center of my initial reflection on how, we all know mythopoetic and the fantasy traditions. I don't want to repeat what I've said on the other panel about different layers of memories which work differently in different civilizations and different societies. What happens is that, like Chenua Achebe's, things fall apart, is a classic tale. Is a classic tale of intervention, colonial imperial intervention, and breaking down, the existing layers of memories and creating a superimposing that memory, and which founds a print production. So most of us, Vivek, I think grown up, even Godan, even Kutulun Hadars, Aapka Dariya, even Pachpan Kambe Lal Diware, even, Kafan, Mitra Marjani, Chit Cobra, all these stories, I'm using, Walter Benjamin's idea in his essay, Work of Art, in the age of mechanical reproduction. These are produced by print capitalism. These are not part of our mythopoetic imagination or memory. The stories that we hear about Sihasan Battiti, Tota Mana, Ali Baba Chalis Chor, etc., etc. These stories have multiple versions. In fact, Ramayana has multiple versions. Universal, non-universal. So you have a dispute, contestation about those stories, which some of us in some other regions, linguistic regions, consider very significant, very precious, but others won't. I mean, like the Santal, Ramayana story is different. Maithili Ramayana story is full of Lalit, full of Sita's teasing, so what I'm thinking, more in a conceptual as a literary theorist, which I don't teach. So I get the opportunity, Vivek, here to, indirectly intervene in where Anamika is the best person. I would really look for her comments on that. So what is that story that becomes Gosai Bagh, Ghost of Gosai Bagh? Or maybe, War and Peace. I worked on, Damodar Bhai's story, Chameleon, and I compared it to Anna Karenina. And it became really, definitionally, thank you, Jitendra ji, again, so, aur bhi maza aayega. So I think, so this is where I was thinking about, now professors of literature are here, so I now take more liberty with my imagination. Vivek, just give me 2-3 minutes more. So what I'm thinking about, that maybe we need, deconstruction is a poor term these days, but I'm just using for the semiological purpose, that a story, whatever story I've referred to, I mean, like all kinds of stories, including Mitra Vardhani, I think requires, according to Walter Benjamin, this Benedict Anderson's imagined space. If it is not imagined space, that story will never acquire what he calls aura. If the story doesn't have aura, that's not going to have what he calls authenticity, singularity, and also universality. And this is where I'm trying to contest Walter Benjamin's ideas, very dominant ideas in literature and literary theory. And coming back from our own Indian traditions, like A.K. Ramanujan used to teach and tell us that, look, the beauty of dialectics in Indian storytelling is that it's context dependent. It's like what Anantamurthy called backyard and also front yard. So front yard is produced, imaginary, capitalist, print capitalism. So this is where I'm looking at, and I'm thinking about the story has to have that material like mitti. Anamika calls it mitti. I've heard her speaking somewhere about Babu, ye mitti hai babu, ye mitti hai, ye Ganga ki mitti, Saryu ki mitti. So that, what is that mitti and material, So this mitti comprises of your residues, I've just done my map of memories and I was looking at remains of memories. So when you go back in the Eastern tradition, I'm sorry, I may be guilty of, perpetuating, Occidental versus Oriental traditions, which I'm not doing, but contesting. So you have to have your aesthetic material, your mythopoetic material, and at the same time, the power of this imagined print capitalism. If you do not produce and reproduce, I used to tell stories, both Santanu and Rishabh, Anamika knows them, Chotka ko. And then this Chotka is now Baltimore. So whenever I get the time, I tell him stories of continents, and while telling stories, I mix up, And Rishabh tells me, Dad, you are mixing up something. It's your own creation. And this is where I believe that perhaps we have looked at rather more, we're simplifying the idea of timelessness or perhaps universality. And because as A.K. Ramanujan said rightly, that Indian story traditions are context dependent and also context independent. And this is where, let's look at the large landscape that Arab stories came here, our stories went there, our stories went all over, in Hungary, I found traces of our stories. So this is where I will stop that. Maybe, what happens to that aura when it's travel across cultures, Northeast tells different kind of Chitrangada, Bihar, you hear different kind of Chitrangada. So I think stories are universal, and our stories are also like, Anantamurti, very parochial, growing in your backyard. Your granny's gossip. In my poem about Granny Maria, I speak about gossiping. So ultimately concluding, stories that becomes timelessness requires a property is like unfaithful lover. Thank you.
Thank you for this. I'm sure we'll. Hello. We will come back to this again, but since you raised this question of A.K. Ramanujan and also the print capitalism, Ramanujan also said that the very few Indians, or perhaps no Indian, reads Mahabharata or Ramayana for the first time, right? Because he or she has already heard it either from her parents or grandparents, and it never happens that an Indian reads for the first time. So I'm not sure if we can extend this to print capitalism, because yeah. So anyway, we will come back to this. We'll come back, and we will, after Manisha shares her thoughts, we will come back and focus on, again, what is, slightly change the definition of timelessness and talk about classics, and see if we can discuss this in the context of at least modern literature of, say, let's say 200 years. Yeah.
अभी बार बार जिक्र हो रहा था कि टाइमलेसनेस सही शब्द नहीं है कहानी के लिए, तो मैं इसीलिए हिंदी में बात करूंगी, क्योंकि हिंदी में टाइमलेसनेस नहीं है, कालजयीता है। ऐसी कहानियां जिन्होंने काल को जीत लिया हो, इसलिए हम उसको टाइमलेसनेस नहीं कहेंगे, काल को जीतने वाली बात कहेंगे। और बार बार बाउंड्रीज से परे जाने की बात कही जा रही थी, तो उसके लिए भी हिंदी में एक सुंदर शब्द है, सार्वभौमिकता। तो वो शब्द भी कहीं आपको बाउंड्रीज में नहीं बांधता, फैलाता है। तो अगर हम अंग्रेजी से हिंदी में आए तो हमारे विस्तार कहीं मनोवैज्ञानिक तौर पे और सांस्कृतिक तौर पे बहुत फैल जाते हैं। मुझे अभी इन कहानियों के संदर्भ में, हम बार बार फेरी टेल्स की तरफ और बार बार कथा सरित सागर पंचतंत्र की तरफ जा रहे थे, जिनका इम्पैक्ट हम सबके जीवन पे बहुत गहरे तक है। लेकिन अगर हम आधुनिक कहानी की तौर पे जाएं तो मैं उन 4 कहानियों की बात करूंगी जो सच में कालातीत, कालजयी और अपनी बाउंड्रीज के पार है। आप सबको एक कहानी हम सबको बहुत पसंद है, द लास्ट लीफ। अगर हम उसे देखें, ओ हेनरी की ये कहानी है द लास्ट लीफ, तो इसमें कहीं भी अगर हम देखें तो ये कहानी आज भी उतनी ही मुकम्मल है जितनी कि उस सदी में रही होगी जब ओ हेनरी ने इसे लिखा था। कि वो लड़की, वो पेंटर उस लड़की की मानसिकता को समझ रहा है और ये देख रहा है कि वो और बीमार होती जाती है, जैसे जैसे एक एक पत्ती गिरती जाती है। तो वो वहां जाकर आखिरी पत्ती गिरने से पहले उस पत्ती को पेंट कर देता है, और वो रात भर गिरती बर्फ में उस पत्ती को पेंट करते हुए खुद मर जाता है और वो लड़की जी जाती है। तो वे कहानियां जिनमें प्रेम है, मृत्यु है, महत्वाकांक्षा है और मनोवैज्ञानिक जटिलताएं हैं, हम सबको पसंद आती हैं। और इसी तरह अगर हम हिंदी कहानी में एक कहानी पर बात करें, उसने कहा था कहानी भी एक कालजयी कहानी है जिसमें प्रेम है, कहीं ना कहीं एक राइवलरी है, और उसका एक वाक्य आप सबको याद होगा, तेरी कुड़माई होगी। तो ये जो मासूम प्रेम है और इस प्रेम के बाद जो उसकी उदात्तता है, वो इस कहानी को कालजयी बनाती है। और इसके आगे हम, अगर मैं और बाउंड्रीज के पार जाऊं, क्योंकि मैंने 3 साल केरल में बिताए हैं, त्रिवेंद्रम में बिताए हैं, तो मुझे बशीर की कहानी याद आती है, दीवारें। जिस कहानी में 2 कैदी हैं, उसमें एक स्त्री कैदी है, दूसरी पार रहती है, और एक पॉलिटिकल कैदी जो शायद खुद बशीर है, वो इस पार है, क्योंकि उधर महिला जेल है, इधर पुरुष जेल है। ये यहाँ से गुलाब उगाकर उसे देते हैं और दोनों को प्रेम हो जाता है। फिर वो बताती है कि वो मर्डरर है और जल्दी उसे फांसी होने वाली है। दोनों मिलने का प्लान बनाते हैं कि तुम ऐसा करना कि तुम बीमार हो गई हो, अस्पताल में जाना, बुधवार को मैं भी आऊंगा। और क्योंकि इसका जो प्रोटोगोनिस्ट है वो पॉलिटिकल कैदी है, तो उसको जल्दी छोड़ दिया जाता है बुधवार आने से पहले ही। तो इस तरह की आकस्मिकताएं, इस तरह के प्रेम, इस तरह के संकट, इस तरह के स्वप्न, इस तरह की जिज्ञासाएं, इस ये सारी मनोवैज्ञानिक जटिलताएं जिन कहानियों में होती है, जिनसे हम रिलेट कर पाते हैं, हम नायक और नायिका से प्रेम कर पाते हैं, हम उनसे घृणा कर पाते हैं, हम उन पे खींचते हैं, हम उन अंतों को बदल देना चाहते हैं कि ये कहानी का अंत क्यों नहीं बदल गया था, वो एक दिन पहले क्यों छूट गया। वो सारी कहानियां जो हमें उद्वेलित करती हैं वो कालजयी कहानियां होती हैं। और जैसा कि हम सब जानते हैं कि हम सब अगर कालजयी कहानियों में सबसे ऊपर रखें तो प्रेम कहानियों को रखते हैं, क्योंकि हम सबको प्रेम से कुछ खास प्रेम होता है, क्योंकि एक लेखक के अंदर रूमानियत हमेशा रहती है। और हम अक्सर उन कहानियों पे गौर करते हैं जिनमें प्रेम एक उदात्त रूप में आता है। और अगर हम भारतीयता को और एक सार्वभौमिकता के तौर पे देखें, तो अगर हम यूरोपियन कहानियों के अंत देखते हैं, वहां आयरनी होती है, लेकिन हमारे यहाँ क्या तेरी कुड़माई हो गई तक बात जाती है। तो मुझे लगता है कि सार्वभौमिकता में वहां से आयरनी हमारे यहाँ संप्रेषित होती है और यहाँ से उदात्तता उस तरफ जाती है, तब भी कोई कहानी कालजयी हो जाती है। अगर मैं किसी एक कालजयी उपन्यास की बात करूं तो मुझे शंकर का उपन्यास चौरंगी आज भी उतना ही रिलेटेबल लगता है जो कि तब था। तो मुझे लगता है कि कालजयी कहानियों की जो सबसे बड़ा गुण होता है वो रिलेटेबिलिटी तो है ही। और अगर मैं देखूं कि सांस्कृतिकता, हम दूसरों की सांस्कृतिकता के झरोकों में झांक कर देखना चाहते हैं। अगर मैं बशीर की कहानियों को पसंद करती हूँ या मैं किसी नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न राइटर की कहानियों को पसंद करती हूँ, तो उसके पीछे एक नयापन भी है। ऐसा नहीं है कि हम उन संस्कृतियों को पहचानते नहीं तो उनको प्रेम नहीं करते। हम उन नई संस्कृति के झरोकों में भी झांकना चाहते हैं जो कि हमें नई चीजों को दिखाती है, हमारे सामने नया संसार प्रकट करती है। और इन कालजयी संसार की इन तमाम कालजयी कहानियों को एक दूसरे को देने के लिए मैं अनुवादकों का खास तौर पे धन्यवाद करती हूँ, जिन्होंने इन कहानियों को और कालजयी होने में अपना योगदान दिया है। धन्यवाद।
Thank you very much. I think you have provided enough for us to take this forward. Let me just put this slightly differently. Any work, whether it is a story or a novel or whatever it is, it has to be very personal experience, because literature is very personal. It is not a collective thing. Homer may be a great poet, but unless Homer is meaningful to me, he is not a great poet, right? So it's a very personal experience. And in that process, what we do is, we talked about, I think you mentioned about unsaid. There is a lot of unsaid in a work, whether it's Mahabharata, there are so many great works. And as a reader, if you can connect to that unsaid, if you can place our words or our experiences and touch upon and open up that unsaid, it is where we connect, really. And which is why we come back to our work over a period of time. I read it today, I read it 10 years later, I read it 20 years. Tolstoy, for example, I have been reading. But I don't mean to say that Tolstoy has to be great to all of them. It's very personal. It's very personal. So I just want to make this difference and pick your brains on what are some of these works and characteristics which has touched you personally, to which you go back again and again. The reason is I'm trying to see if there are some characteristics or some kind of criteria that evolves or comes out in this discussion, which can point us to identify a work as And timeless is a very timeless in at least on our lifetime. Let us say that. Yeah. So that we have more discussion on this, and also if you can talk about the examples that are more recent, maybe last 100 years. Who would like to go?
I would like to differ slightly with what Ashwani ji said when he talked about print capitalism, because most of our stories which have endured the passage of time are not definitely printed ones. Many speakers have mentioned Mahabharata or Ramayana, but in all of them, and in fact, I'm reminded of Dr. Pratibha Rai when she was writing the foreword for my book, which has been published by Nirmal Da. The first thing that she's written is that this is a family saga. Family sagas have gone back from the days of the Ramayana or the Mahabharata. So there is something about family problems which maybe make us relate to it. And we go, so you just want to go back to these stories which look so similar to you. I don't know why, but there is something which resonates within you. And the second thing where again I kind of disagree with Ashwini is that it is not about the Occident or the Orient. And if you look at recent trends, a lot of Japanese authors are being now celebrated and read their translated works in India. So I don't want to get into that sociological, trap or web of of adding labels to everything. I think a tale or a story is something which will appeal to, I mean, if it's a Harry Potter, it has been translated into perhaps after Bible, the second largest number of languages in the world. And it appeals to children in Delhi, children in Guwahati, children in Chennai, children in Latin America or wherever. So, but there is something in that tale which fires their imagination. They may have never seen a wizard. They may have never seen a castle, but something about it makes them want to dream, makes them want to think. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I would like to talk about this from the media lens. There are three things that come to my mind. One is stories that became part of public service broadcaster. Stories that became part of public service broadcaster. So I'm talking about the 90s, when for the first time we saw Hum Log. And you will all remember how it happened. S.S. Gill was Secretary Information Broadcasting Ministry. He had gone for a trip abroad. Late at night, he was watching television, and he saw in Singapore, there was one particular soap opera which was very popular. He looked at it, he came back, and in the same office, the DT office, he called for a meeting. And there were a couple of storytellers, and the person who was selected was Manohar Shyam Joshi. He was asked to create a bunch of stories together, create something which could bind the Indian audience together. And that is how Hum Log started. That is a very good example of storytelling, because that was the time when India was facing a lot of problems, including unemployment, alcoholism, illiteracy, and so on. So public service broadcaster was keeping in mind literature, which was integral part of the Indian memory, from Premchand to Mahadevi Verma, the stories that were being weaved at that time. And even now, those stories are there in our minds. Second is stories through cinema. So cinema is a big screen. We watch stories, we see the beginning, the middle, and the end, and we come back satisfied. Sometimes these stories stay with us all our lives. And the third is story as a journalist, which we generally talk about. For us, everything is a story. Every news media is all the time talking about a story. Of all my journalist friends, whenever they call or I call them up, I always ask them, kya khabar hai? What is a khabar? Khabar is a story. So for us, maybe it is a 90-second story or 60-second story, but that is a different kind of a story. So what has happened over the years? Since the beginning of the human civilization, we have all been talking about stories. But these stories have changed primarily over the years, especially after the advent of television. And the years when we witnessed the birth of private television channel in India, especially in India, we saw stories took a different turn. And today what we see are different storytellers. Wisdom gurus are storytellers. People at Mahakumbh are storytellers. People on social media are also storytellers. Everybody has a microphone, a camera, a mobile. They are all telling stories in their own ways. Everybody is a journalist and everybody is a storyteller. But at the same time, the biggest challenge at the moment is that these storytellers are also, to a large extent, now being guided by the market. बाजार में क्या बिक रहा है, लोगों को क्या पसंद है, और उसके हिसाब से स्टोरीज बनने लगी हैं. ये एक बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज है. अभी बात हुई प्रेमचंद और महादेवी वर्मा की, निर्मल वर्मा, ये सारे नाम मैं कभी कभी सोचती हूँ वो जमाना भी अगर मोबाइल का होता तब कौन सी कहानी दिखती, और ये जमाना जिसमें मोबाइल है उसमें कौन सा साहित्य ज्यादा टिक पा रहा है. आप बड़े बड़े लेखक को जब मिलते हैं, बहुत से लोग ये कहते हैं हमने आपकी स्टोरी पढ़ी थी, पढ़ी नहीं होती, उन्होंने आपका नाम, आपकी तस्वीर और आपकी स्टोरी को थोड़ी देर क्लिक किया होता है, और क्लिक करने के आधार पर वो कहते हैं हमने स्टोरी को पढ़ा है. तो स्टोरी कालजयी वो हुई जिसे असल में हमने कुछ साल पहले पढ़ा था, वो आज भी याद है, या आज जो कहानी लिखी जा रही है वो हमें तब याद है जब हम उसे तस्वीरों के साथ, रंगों के साथ, आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस के साथ, चैट जीपीटी के साथ, या फिर मीडिया के नजरिए से खुला मिलाकर देखते हैं. बहुत सारी खबरें जब बहुत तस्वीरों के साथ मिलती हैं तब मीडिया के उस बाजार के बीच में स्टोरी का रंग और उसका स्वाद बदल जाता है.
Let's come back and talk about why we go back to the stories rather than the storytelling and different ways of storytelling. Can I request you to share your thoughts, please? And just let's focus on the, if I may say, classic aspect of it.
When I was a kid, some 60 years ago, I asked my grandparents to tell me stories. My grandfather always told stories from Ramayana and Mahabharata. But my grandmother told several folk tales, and whenever she completed one folk tale, she will start asking questions just to find out whether I have gone into the story. I have to tell her what I feel about the story. I will tell you a very, very short story that she told me years ago, which refuses to go out of my mind. She would narrate the story like this. Long, long ago, nobody knows how long ago, there lived a king. Stories always are told about the kings. This sort of interpretation. So long, long ago, there lived a king who was a headstrong fellow. He never respected anyone, including his wife. So one particular day, a sage from the Himalayas had come to the king. He expected the king to stand up. Unfortunately, the king did stand up. He crossed his legs and sat tightly. And then several people in the court said, see, a great sage from the Himalayas had come, but there is no respect given to him. And the sage became very wild, because sages, you know, as we go through the old folk tales or even modern folk tales, as Kafka has done in Germany, this particular tale, there was a curse. The sage cursed the king. He said, in 12 months' time, you will die. And then swiftly he left the court. In 12 months' time, you will die. Then the king was in the king became very jittery. And I should do something before I die, because the curse given by a sage will come true. So I should do something within these 12 months, what I can do to become a wise man. So he started giving away his property to all the poor people, and he has constructed temples, had constructed schools, this and that. And 12 months have passed. The sage came back. The sage came back from the same Himalayas. And then the king suddenly stood up. The king suddenly stood up and gave him a lot of respect. And he said, Sage, I have understood what sort of a sage you are. You must live in my court, in my palace, for at least 3 days and spend your precious time here. The sage said, No, I would like to go back to my Himalayas just to find out how you are. When he was about to leave, the king told him, 12 months ago, you said, I will die. Now I am alive. What had happened to your curse? And the sage immediately said, Who said you are not dead? Who said you are not dead? Just go into the story. Who said you are not dead? See, the king has become a wise man. What had happened to the atrocious king who never respected the great minds, the great people? He is dead and gone. Now, some other king in his place has come. It is sort of a resurrection. So, this is the story that refuses to go out of my mind, even though I have told this story to my children and to my students. It refuses to go out of my mind. That is because the story has become a tale now. The story has become a tale for the greater purpose of, if a story can go into your heart and gets stuck there, that is the greatest tale a story can be. Thank you.
Would you like to reflect on this? You have some thoughts? Otherwise, fine. We can go move on.
Yeah. Hello. What is your question again? You wanted us to talk about?
No, I was talking about how a work becomes personal.
Yes.
And if you can talk about with some examples.
Yeah, you had said that you personally feel that stories.
No,
which
what
are-
I was saying is that literature is a very personal experience.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a
So
very,
yeah.
Yeah. So, see, when I have, I'll talk about some tales and some maybe some, one or two examples of the classics that we have. Tales means, I remember my grandmother telling me stories. Stories used to end prince and princess happily married and lived happily ever after. So after some time, it didn't interest me. I started running and sleeping. Then once he told me a story, like there were two cousins, both the princess and another girl, and prince was been cursed, and he was the royal doctor had put some needles on his eyes, and the needles are to be taken one after one another, and the last needle is to be taken by the girl who loves him, and then he'll be cured. So it just happened that the last needle has been treacherously been plugged by the other girl who is actually not in love with her, love with him. So that kind of thing really stirred my imagination, maybe because of the complexity and the layered way of it. And I tried to relate probably more to it than so sometimes personal experience comes as a kind of a rebel. That's what I'm saying. So I just tell you our classic Mahabharata, again, the story of Shakuntala. I often used to think in the younger age, so why did Shakuntala go back to Dushyant? What was there in need? she was quite happy in her father's place, and the child could have grown up and could have been as valiant as possible. Why did she do? So that kind of question also had stored in my mind, where a personal kind of a feeling has been bombarded with a kind of a happening which is so different. Maybe a personal conviction has clashed with what is happening. So I can say that in many of the classics, as you said, personal experience, like, our classics flow from Mahabharata, Ramayana, and then the Indian classics that we are talking about, or the classics like War and Peace, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Old Man and the Sea. So, as I said, that being a cerebral person, a writer's, with imagination, puts these sports of artistry and then creates a world where the reader is drawn to it. Probably that makes it a classic tale of human suffering, the tale of love, tale of everything, like, war. Everything's there in proper concussion and concussion, and then proper proportion, and the resultant is a kind of a thing which haunts the memory of. Maybe at the end of the session we will all conclude that there is no specific ingredients to make a tale timeless. Anyway, thank you.
जैसे कि विवेक आप बोल रहे थे कि सबकी अपनी पर्सनल चॉइस होती है और अपना एक पर्सनल, बल्कि हम ये कहें कि किसी वक्त पे आपको कोई किताब अच्छी लग रही होती है और किसी वक्त पर कोई और किताब अच्छी लग रही होती है। इसका उदाहरण दूंगी कि जब मैं टीनेजर थी तो मुझे गुनाहों का देवता बहुत पसंद थी, और अब जब मैंने दोबारा पढ़ा तो मुझे लगा कि थोड़ा बचकाना हो गया। लेकिन सूरज का सातवां घोड़ा धर्मवीर भारती की किताब है, जिसे मैं कहूंगी वो आज भी टाइमलेस है, क्योंकि वो एक आयरनी की बात करती है, एक पॉलिटिकल एंगल उसमें है, उसमें मनोविज्ञान है बहुत सारा। तो मुझे लगता है कि जब हम बात करते हैं कि क्यों कुछ लेखक बहुत पॉपुलर होते हैं, उनको बहुत ज्यादा लोग उनसे रिलेट कर पाते हैं, और कुछ लेखकों से, जैसे कृष्ण बलदेव वैद्य बहुत एब्स्ट्रैक्ट लिखते हैं, तो उनसे उनका भी एक क्लब है पाठकों का। बीकानेर में अगर छोटा सा एक शहर है राजस्थान में, वहां पर कृष्ण बलदेव वैद्य साहब को पढ़ने वालों का एक छोटा सा क्लब है, जबकि वो इतना एब्स्ट्रैक्ट लिखते हैं कि उनको पढ़ना आसान नहीं है। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये चॉइस की तो बात है, लेकिन फिर भी कुछ क्लासिक्स होते हैं जो टाइमलेस होते हैं, जिनको मेरी माँ ने भी पढ़ा था, जिनको मैंने भी पढ़ा है, और जिनको मेरी बेटी ने भी पढ़ा। जैसे मैं कहूंगी कि मनु भंडारी जी का आपका बंटी, जिसको मेरी माँ ने पढ़ा था, मैंने पढ़ा, और मेरी बेटी निफ्ट में पढ़ती थी और मनु जी का घर वहां पास ही था। तो आपका बंटी पढ़ के वो कहती है, मम्मा मैं मनु भंडारी जी से मिलने जाऊंगी। तो मुझे लगता है कि कुछ लेखक ऐसे होते हैं जिनको आप हर समय हर युग में पढ़ा जा सकता है। और अगर मैं बात कहूँ और भी क्लासिक्स की, तो मुझे लगता है कि जो आपके पात्र होते हैं, तो जैसे कहें कि आना कारेनीना, तो आना कारेनीना आपको अलग तरीके से डील करती है, और आना कारेनीना का जो एब्सोल्यूट लव है, जिसको परम प्रेम की परिभाषा कहते हैं, तो हो सकता है कि दूसरों को लगे कि ये क्या बेवकूफी थी, लेकिन अगर इसमें टॉल्स्टॉय का खुद का अनुभव देखें, तो टॉल्स्टॉय ने खुद ने कहा कि जब वो आना कारेनीना को लिख रहे थे, तो उन्होंने ये सोचा था कि रूस की उस समय की आधुनिक महिलाओं के लिए ये एक लेसन होगा, लेकिन आना कारेनीना ने टॉल्स्टॉय को खुद अपने सम्मोहन में बांध लिया, और वो वहीं ले गई जहां पर वो जाना चाहती थी टॉल्स्टॉय को। तो मुझे लगता है कि कुछ चीजें हमेशा टाइमलेस रहती हैं, क्योंकि उनको पढ़ने वाले बहुत ज्यादा लोग होते हैं, उनसे रिलेट करने वाले बहुत ज्यादा लोग होते हैं।
Yeah, thank you for that. There are a couple of things. One is we may not have time to discuss, but I just want to touch up ritualistic reading. Because we have in India, we do read stories. We read because thinking that it's punya ka kaam hai. It's something which is good to read and make others listen to the stories. My grandmother used to read Raghuvansh, and though I didn't understand, but it was her belief that if you read stories, there's something good will happen. So there is a ritualistic reading. I'm sure there's a lot of Hanuman Chalisa people read. There are a lot of things people read. And it also has some kind of an impact, or when you read, when you go back to it, may be a meaningless reading, it may seem like, but then it certainly has an impact. Let's not get into that. But the point I was trying to make is, when we go back, we read not because of its what next, because we already know the story. We reread because we know the story. We read because there is something more than that. We all of us know the story, but we read and read and read again. So there is some quality in it, which is what I was talking about, unsaid and connecting and so on and so forth. My question to the panelists, which all of us are writers in some form or the other, is, we writers also read certain books. We read because we want to understand craft. We want to understand what that worldview is. We want to understand how, in a different culture, a particular life experience is captured. There are many other things that we read and reread works. So can I ask you, what are those, whatever, I'm sure all of us read many such things, not just one or two, but I request you to name 2 books that you go back to, and why? Keeping craft in mind.
I was, before, Vivek, I think we dealt with, the idea of timelessness rather slyly. I'm using that Derridian term. And we succeeded in exposing the slyness of the quality in the story, slyness, a certain slyness, and the unfaithfulness of the story. If it is faithful, it's not going to last. I mean, like that, that's very important for the story. And then also about, I gather from different speakers on the panel, there seems to be, a chaos in the universe of memories about stories, chaos. And this chaos is animated by a certain idea of relativism. That, I like this story, I don't like that story. So that I is at the center, But this I, this personal, even in mythopoetic context, Vivek, is also social. No story can become universal or authentic, genuine, if it doesn't have social. Whether it's Jothan, whether it's Mitro Marjani, whether it's, even Harry Potter. See, Harry Potter is a classic tale of a cosmopolitan consciousness of the middle class. No denying about it. I'm not using typical Marxian terminology of bourgeoisie, and produced by a certain instrument of print capitalism globally. There is that sense of a global capitalism, because in Mumbai's Chawl, when we did a survey on slum children, they have never heard about Harry Potter. They're migrant children. I've worked extensively last 20 years on them. Even their fathers and mothers remember Bhikhari Thakur, the Bhojpuriya story. So what I'm thinking, also Vivek, we need to problematize, the dialectics between front yard and the backyard, and also the Hegelian dialectics, why that story becomes luminous in terms of, episodic memory rather than axial or, or semantic memory. That's why in this story, see, memories cannot be fully retrieved, Vivek. It will be only partially retrieved. My father told me the king story, but there is also an element of caste and class in India particularly. So that same story of the king would not travel to Manipur or elsewhere, or perhaps in Bihar. The caste is the centrality. That is why a story has to have that, social part. That's what I would like to mention.
Every story, of course, has to have, because if it is not social, the moment you write it becomes social. It's outside of you. Yeah. Otherwise, it's not. But what my point was, when you read it, it has to be personal to you. as a reader. Yeah. So that's the point, because there are certain things which are collective. There are certain things which are So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I will involve, I will also like, Anamika and others to join us. I think, I was thinking about McIntyre philosopher. I've worked again extensively on McIntyre. There is a certain kind of emotional sublimation. So when you read the story Kafan, I was speaking to my Dalit colleagues and activists. They don't like that story. Gopal Guru's famous essay on that. You like Thakur Ka Kuan has become provocative. So for them, and Namdev Dasal, went to the extent saying that I will repeat, 1,000 lies in my stories. You have told me wrongly 1,000 truths of your own making. So this is where, Vivek, I'm trying to problematize the very idea of conceptualizing, what is eternal. But when this eternal I translate into, Sanatan, it becomes very problematic. It does not cross Vindhya. So this is why I'm trying to suggest that ultimately, I may not enjoy Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, but there are some, I come from Bombay poetry landscape where people haven't heard about Bihari Thakur. Never ever even imagined, they have no idea of, even Premchand came to Bollywood, Bombay, lived and gone, disappeared. So this is where I'm saying it is not for me very simplistic landscape. I love, I love Vivek's Gachar Gochar. For me, it's contemporary classic, Give him a big hand because, it's marvelous work, And when I was talking to him, every time I go to cafe anywhere in the world, I think of his story over here. But the same I find in Nirmal Verma's story. I still remember, where is Martha, fascism, Nazism growing. So I guess, what I would like to say, moving from, aura to sublimation and a certain kind of emotive sublimation, like Life of Pi, or, or 100 Years of Solitude, or the Sinai or Shiva in Midnight Children. That's sublimating. If the story does not sublimate in a Hegelian sense, I think that the story will never ever become part of our episodic memory. Thank you.
I agree with you, but only my addition to that is that it is cultural specific. There is no work which can be world classic. Because Jane Austen, as you said, I don't care. For me, what is written in Kannada is more important than anywhere written anything in some other language, right? So similar goes to the Bihari Thakur. Yeah. So anyway, can we go back to my question and end this? It's the last question, and if we have some time, we can open it up. If there are any comments or questions, my question is, since all of us are writers, are there any two works that you would like to name for why do you want to go back to these works? Because I said, obviously, it's not because of the story or anything. It's more to look at the craft, and I'm more interested in the craft aspect.
So there are these two books. One is Old Path, White Clouds, written by the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. I think that has crossed the zones of years and times. So I'm talking about Thich Nhat Hanh and the book Old Path, White Clouds. And the other book, which I was thinking about, is by Sri Aurobindo, My Prison Days. And there's one sentence which I think is very powerful. He has narrated that the day when he was imprisoned in Alipur jail and he was sent for a solitary confinement, he wrote on a piece of paper that, God, I do not know why I have landed here. I would really like to know why I am here. There must be a reason. Exactly after 365 days, when he is released from the same solitary confinement, before he is released, he writes on that piece of paper, now I exactly know why did I reach this place. And in those 365 days, There's only a small piece of sky that he could see from that small little room where he was imprisoned. And when he came out, the entire journey changed. And we all know how he had completely changed his life and what Pondicherry is today. So I think these two books are life-changing books because the more you read them, you feel that these are stories of reality and these are stories of change which have a lot of motivational power and a lot of truth in it.
Thank you. Just name the books. No need to narrate the
So,
story. Yeah.
Sapiens, because I think it's one of the most original ways of thinking and looking at a history which is all known to us. And Midnight's Children, because again, like you said, and I agree with that, you know what's going to happen, you know where it's going to end. So in terms of craft, how do you keep the reader engaged so that the reader stays on, turns pages and goes to the last page?
Yeah.
Even if it is non-fiction, it's
For me, gachar gachar, but yeah, on the lighter side. But on the serious note, I find we were coming to the craft part. We haven't spoken. Of late, I'm becoming very dissatisfied by what I call the technology of writing used by male writers. And even please provoking all of you that even the great writers, men writers, I find problematic. And this is where my two books that I have recently rediscovered through a Pacific memory. I'm coming back because my new book is Map of Memories, so I'm returning again and again. The one is Chit Cobra. This time, I read Chit Cobra a couple of times. And also, Pachpan Khambe Lal Diware, which, Sanjini and me have set up this Indian Novels Collective, and Daisy Rockwell translated that. So I think the women craft, the way they craft this story through print capitalism, I get, that residue of a certain kind of, aesthetics, which is very rare, craft-wise.
लालटीन की छत निर्मल वर्मा, क्योंकि मुझे निर्मल वर्मा की भाषा और उनका क्राफ्ट बहुत पसंद है। और अगर मैं अभी अभी की एक और किताब की बात करूं तो 40 रूल्स ऑफ लव, एलिफ शफक की, और उसमें उन्होंने जिस तरह से सूफिज्म को और मॉडर्न लाइफ को मिक्स किया है वो मुझे बहुत पसंद आया था।
These two books which I have read again and again and again and found some other meaning every time. One is the book you have already mentioned, Anna Karenina. I read it first when I was in, 15, 16 years old, and I was very annoyed. What a bad woman she is. How could she do this to her husband and the child and go away? Then I started reading it many times, and there came the personal conviction and experience. And well, I still am glued to that book. And the other one is, like Manisha, I also like love stories, reading love stories, trying to write few of those. So I like that For Whom the Bell Tolls, Hemingway. That short, crisp, and very fascinating love story of Maria and the protagonist. I read it so many times as a child and adult. That was my favorite book in my adulthood. And I read it so many times on and on. I mean, I remember all the lines of that because how it happened. It was so magical and so short-lived and so sudden and so circumstantial. Well, it still I get goosebumps when I talk about it. Thank you.
Since I am asked to mention two books, I would like to say The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. And the second book is A Letter from an Unknown Woman by a German writer, Stefan Zweig. But apart from this, I would like to tell you the best short story is the ghost story. The best, shortest story in the world is a ghost story. A man was traveling in a train, running train, and about 12 o'clock, another gentleman entered. when the first one was reading a newspaper, the gentleman entered and asked a question, "Do you believe in ghosts?" The man took his eyes off the newspaper and said, "No, I don't believe." The final line is, the man who entered vanished. The man who entered vanished. So now, what makes this story a tale is the word vanished. Thank you.
Okay.
You have to say.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's a 15th century classic in Kannada called Kumar, and he is called the emperor of metaphors. And I go back to him, I don't know, hundreds of times. And that's something that's very inspiring, very, very. The other writer whom I really admire, there are lots of them, but is Isaac Bashevis Singer, who by narrating even the simplest act of picking up and drinking water, he can convert into a story. I mean, the way he uses his language and creates that imagery is outstanding. So these are two, but otherwise, Tolstoy is my favorite writer, so on and so forth. Yeah, and thank you very much. I think it was a very lively discussion, diverse views, different experiences, different examples, and I hope. Yeah, I think we have.
Sure.
Yeah, if someone wants to ask a question to any of us, if you can specify the name, we can take two questions. Yeah.
Up there.
Just questions directly, please.
I have questions. I heard the Raja as well as Vartika as well. So, how the stories are preserved, how the presentation of stories are transferred from grandparents to fathers and children. But at those times, stories were preserved, they were transferred from generation to generation. So, right now, what we are here, we are having book recommendation is mostly done by non-writers, if I can say, especially like celebrities who are not writers. How will you say that good books are written? There will always be good work written by everyone. So how we can make sure that our art and our good stories or novels are preserved and it's not recommended by.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, let me answer this briefly. It is whatever recommendation, whatever it may sell 100,000 copies. It's all marketing, selling. It's other part of it, right? But what remains really are the books which touch you, which actually hurts you. Those books remain, and we have seen that all through in our history. So I don't think we should bother too much about which celebrity recommends which book. I don't think it is any.
Yes, resonance part. I was wondering if the resonance part could be discussed.
Yeah.
Whatever stays back, whatever makes so fresh, whatever drops a seed in you, whatever engages your moral inquiry,
Yeah.
whatever makes you the co-producer of meaning, if you could say that, whatever gets you thinking, involved, whatever like him, makes you vanish. Vanish and create yourself afresh. One line each, please.
I think your line itself is a great because yeah. No. I think you have answered because that's the most important thing. Really.
So do we have okay. So yes.
I don't have a question. I just have a small statement. The specific stories becoming timeless tales. In Odia, I have read one story which is made up of several stories centered around Gandhiji, but Gandhiji remains out of focus. And the principles of Gandhiji are taken in question. Violence and non-violence, honesty, dishonesty, the rural background and urban background. And that is written by Paramita.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us. And I thank Sahitya Akademi for creating this opportunity. Thank you so much.
बहुत ही दिलचस्प हमारा डिस्कशन रहा जहां पर हमारे चेयर ने पर्सनल स्टोरीज की बात की, कहा लिटरेचर इज अ पर्सनल एक्सपीरियंस। तो मुझे साहिर का वो शेर याद आ गया कि दुनिया ने तजर्बात हवादिस की शक्ल में जो कुछ मुझे दिया है वो लौटा रहा हूं मैं। So we had diverse views. We talked about print capitalism, Harry Potter, media stories, relatability, and then we spoke about folklore, पंचतंत्र, कितना कुछ हुआ। So मेरे लिए एक बहुत ही invigorating experience था। Thank you all the speakers and thank you audience for contributing to it. May I request all these speakers to kindly step forward, right in the front, ahead of these tables. Kindly gather here for a group picture.
Very important session. Thank you so much.
So इसी के साथ हमारे आज के दिन का समापन होता है। कल मुलाकात होगी आप सभी